Okay, and we are live. JT here. Welcome to The Huddle. The Huddle is where I sit down with successful people from the world of sport and coaching. It's to learn more about their journey to greatness. Why do I have these conversations? Because success always leaves clues. I want to take a moment to thank you, whether you are watching in our Facebook community or on YouTube, or whether you're listening to the audio on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me and my special guest today. And here's my friendly reminder to you. The mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's wide open. My challenge to you is to go all in on this conversation, to remove any distractions and get laser focused on the here and the now. And my guarantee to you is you will gain a valuable nugget that will not only help you succeed in sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. I've been looking forward to my conversation with my special guest today. Before we came live on air, before we got kicked off, pun intended, we were both kind of laughing that we feel like this conversation could probably go on for a little bit, but so we decided to cap it at, put a time limit on it. My guest in the huddle today is currently serving as the founder and director of the Good Athlete Project. And I came across his work, I just loved his messaging. I loved what the organization's about. And I just love these greater messages that this community is sharing. My guest in the huddle today is Jim Davis. How are you today, brother?
JT, I'm doing so well, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's I'm reminded, from our conversation that one of the practices that I do my best to live by is to count my blessings. And I know, like any skill, it's a skill that needs to be practiced every day. Some days I do it better than others. But I'm a firm believer that the biggest blessing you can give anyone is your time and energy. So I just want to thank you again for giving some of your time and energy to being here with me and our community today, brother. So thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely happy to do it. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll get started here. One of the ideas I often like to remind myself and remind others is that life is a game and games are supposed to be fun. And I had a coaching colleague and great friend that used to tell me and remind me, hey, we all have our quirks. We all have these things that make us unique and different. So celebrate it. So I'm curious, is there an interesting fact, some may call it a quirk, that maybe a lot of people don't know about you that you'd be open to sharing with our community?
Yeah, that's a good question. Countless. I don't know if I had to whittle it down to one. I would say the thing that throughout the course of my life has surprised people is my devotion to the arts, my interest in and devotion to the arts. So I was actually in undergrad, I was a studio art major. And I entered college as a studio art major, bounced around psychology. I was actually a Spanish major. I was very interested in a vast array of things, and ultimately came back to studio art. So painting was my focus. In fact, I've had a number of shows and a decent amount of commissions over time. I'm like a professional artist. I'll just throw it out there. So I make art, also poetry. So here we go. I'm just jumping off. I think, the written word has always been super meaningful to me. And my first graduate degree was at Northwestern University with the focus. It was on poetry. It was creative writing. I did a little comparative literature. Focus was on poetry. So I've actually written a handful of books, given some poetry readings all over the city, all over the country, in fact. Yeah. And had a really good time with that. So yeah, the arts. That's what it is.
Okay.
People don't usually expect it from me, but
yeah, you know what? I heard from you again, being a true Renaissance man, right? Like sort of dabbling in a lot of different, just subject areas. And it just really sounds like you get a lot of joy from learning and growing.
I do. Absolutely, I do. Yeah, yeah. And you know what? I try not to think of the things as inherently separate. I think a lot of the divides in the world are artificial. In fact, that
Mhm,
largely comes from my passion for language. But
mhm.
the way that we name the world creates the world. Perspective is so important, and I know this aligns with your values and the
Yeah.
cultivation of gratitude and optimism and kindness and all these things. But
Mhm.
yeah, the way we name the world is the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I pay very close attention to those sorts of things. I
Okay.
could go all day on that too. I don't want to take that question and just run wild with it, but yeah.
Okay. So I'm curious, sport has obviously played an important role for you in your life. You first, you're a high quality athlete and then transitioned into coaching and just working a lot of different capacities. So I'm curious, what would you say has been maybe the most valuable life lesson you've taken from sport? I know you could probably name a ton of different lessons, but what is that one lesson you find yourself still applying to your life today?
Dude, these are two very challenging questions. This one especially, because I think that's the entire heart of uh, so much of the work I do is maximizing the potential of athletics as education. That was our first mission statement at the project, and it's something I've done inherently my whole life. Man, if I had to pick one, I would say it actually is. It's advice that was given to me by a gentleman named Bob Levin. Bob Levin is one of the most incredible human beings walking the planet. So I'll talk about him for a second. He was a fullback at Yale. He was an activist. He was part of, if you've ever heard of the documentary, I think it's Harvard beats Yale 29-29. It's pretty incredible. The people on the field that day were, well, double back on that. I won't give the whole spiel, but Bob Levin is an incredible human. So, big, powerful guy, played fullback at Yale, as I mentioned, had an opportunity to play for the San Francisco 49ers, actually turned it down to pursue a career in life in education. So he went to Harvard for grad school, and then he went to University of Chicago, I think, for a second round of grad school. Ultimately devoted his life to education, primarily in special education, and football, which was just a very natural teaching platform for him. Came all
Mhm.
that to get to this idea. He had this, it might have been just an off the cuff remark, but at one point along the way, he shared with me this advice: chase the work you're willing to do. And it was such a, it has stuck with me. I've analyzed that idea countless times since then, because you hear so often that it's important to chase your passion, chase something that you love. And while I agree with that, I think, it's hard to maintain a feeling. And
Okay.
chase your passion is such good advice. But what happens on the days when you're not passionate? And you take that from sport to any other area. What about, I see that you have a ring on your left finger. I would imagine, I apologize, I won't personalize it. I've heard this from other folks who are married. They just feel a different sort of love and depth of care for their significant other 10, 20, 40 years down the road than they did
Mhm.
maybe very early on in their relationship. And the depth of that love could hardly, passion's not the right word for it, but you still
Okay.
show up for your partner. You still, do all that work. Same thing applies to, your job. There are, now I will personalize it for me. There are days where I'm in Chicago. I don't want to get up at 5 a.m. and scrape ice from my car so I can get to work, before the sun has even risen,
Yeah.
but I'm willing to do it. But
Yeah.
I'm not passionate about that. If I was banking on passion to get me up and moving at 5:30 in the morning, pitch black and cold, it just isn't there. So I say that because chase the work you're willing to do is far more sustainable. Now, the work you're willing to do should be riddled with passion along the way. There should be plenty of passionate moments, exciting moments, and meaningful moments. But um, that was his advice, and man, I think that can apply to just so many things. Even now, so we're early in the football season. Kids are dog tired. They don't want to get out of bed. They don't want to, they're beat up from 2 days of tough practice. We're at Thursday now, 2-3 days of tough practice. They've gone through, it's early in school. They're still getting acclimated to a long school day. Then they're not passionate. Passion would not be the right word to describe the football player stepping onto the field at 4 p.m. this afternoon to go play the game that, yes, they love, but passion is a hard word to describe their feeling in that moment. But if you can come back to the question, are you willing to do this? Is this meaningful enough to you? And you can say yes, then let's go. You're on the right path. So long answer to a fairly simple idea.
Well, I love what you shared, because like you said, it's that willingness, and I love that you shared, some wisdom that a great mentor passed down to you, and it reminded me of some wisdom that a mentor of mine shared to me. It's like, there's only two questions to ask yourself whenever you're starting a journey: am I able to do it? And then he sort of challenged you that if you see someone else achieving or living the life you want, or achieving there, then you know it's possible. But then the second question you have to ask, am I willing to pay the price? And like you said, that that's what separates people, right? At times is, what are you willing to? And again, it's not good or bad, not positive or negative, but again, it's a question you have to be willing to look at yourself in the mirror and say, what am I willing to do? So I love the simplicity of that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. I agree. and it brings, and there's a heavy dose of self-awareness in that. Like you just explained, and self-awareness is one of the absolute key capacities. It's the key to any pursuit of I hesitate to say greatness, but pursuit of greatness at least. High achievement. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't hesitate. I see you are greatness back there, and you are. I see the book. You are. But for me, I just hesitate. But yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious, what made me fall in love with the work, or what grabbed my attention, was, I think there was an episode where I saw you having a conversation with Coach Louis Carella from Georgia Tech. And I remember just watching, and something piqued my interest there. So I'm curious, what inspired you to pursue this work around, founding the Good Athlete Project? What was the inspiration? What made you sort of be willing to sort of explore this journey?
Another great question. Here's what it was. I was in grad school, the second round. I was sitting in the back of a neuroscience classroom at Harvard University. Part of me was like, man, do I even belong here? Actually, a good friend of mine this morning told me to stop being overly humble about that. I found out that I did, and I really enjoyed it. But I'm sitting in the back of this classroom, and I have come from a career in sports where I played. I was a competitive power lifter. I was a professional football player at a lower level, and really enjoyed it, and had some of the most meaningful experiences of my life. Made some of my best friends. Did make my best friends through sport, at least as an introduction. Traveled the world. Just had a wonderful experience. Then I went on to coaching, and sort of replicated that in a different way. Just positive experience after positive experience. Built some programs, did some cool things. Ultimately, I head out to Cambridge, and I'm in this classroom. That was, again, this sort of winding story. But here I am now in the back of this classroom with this tale of a history behind me. This career in sports. And I'm sitting there, not sure what I'm going to learn or how I'm going to apply it. When I went out to Harvard, I was like, man, this could be a fresh start from the very bottom, foundational shift. And instead of that, I found, holy cow, this thing that I've experienced and really felt for so long has a deep backing of research, suggesting that it might be the most powerful learning environment on the planet. So again, I'm in this neuroscience classroom. The task at hand in the course is, let's identify the ideal learning environment. And now that we're thinking for an educational setting, we're thinking of professional organizational settings, and what, through the lens of the brain, through the lens of neuroscience, what would have to be included in that environment to make it so? Well, the bullet points are like novelty, goal-directed behavior, powerful mentorship, compelling group dynamics. At every stage, I'm like, sports sports. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
I refer to it as like one of the biggest light bulb moments of my life. It just was clicked. And I honestly, I'm looking around the room like, does nobody hear this? Like, we've got this already. This environment exists. It's called athletics. There's 200 million people involved in the U.S. alone. You know, it's already here. The environment's here. The question becomes, are we maximizing the potential of it? Because power does not equal positive outcome, and we know that, right? Sadly, you see storylines every day. It's headlines of sports gone wrong, and people who were, man, if there's nothing that gets me more than someone I look at like a professional athlete, someone who had decades of time in this powerful learning platform under the guidance of people who are supposed to be mentors and developers of human beings. And all of a sudden they're in their 30s and they are not living up to their, they're not their best selves. And that sometimes is putting it lightly. Now, I don't think that the negative fully explains it. Okay. I want to be really clear about that too. I always layer this in when I talk about, sports gone wrong and then the potential of sports going right. I mentioned poetry already. Have you ever heard of the poet Robert Hass? Haas or Hass? I don't know how. Hass.
No,
he's brilliant. He's amazing. I'll send you some stuff.
Okay.
But he quoted someone else. He does a lot of translation, and essentially the translation was something to the extent of the horrors of the world cannot be the truth of the world. Otherwise, there'd be no one to tell of them and no one to tell them to. So I'm like, so that's very powerful. And I always kind of layer that into my conversation of sports. It's like, no, sports, the coach flipping out, the tragedies that are happening at like youth football across the nation, the really negative effects of, I'll just use this term, toxic sports environments. Those aren't the norm. They're just not the norm. You and I have been in too many good places to ever believe that was the norm, but they are the truth to some degree. Like, they are happening. So anyway, fast forward. So those are the two light bulbs. The first is that through the lens of cognitive neuroscience and social theory, this might be the most powerful educational platform on the planet. Second light bulb, but we're not maximizing that potential. So how do we bridge that gap? Well, enter the Good Athlete Project. That was at least the hope. It was, how can we bridge the gap from academy to field and create research-based strategies and methods to teach lessons that will actually last a lifetime, at least based on the research. Too often I think we assume that life lessons are being taught through sport without asking ourselves what lessons and why. Do we really need, like, what is the value of toughness? I happen to believe that there actually is a value in toughness and resilience and, perseverance and whatever you might find, grit. But if you're not doing it explicitly, then you're just creating the proverbial meathead. And, I'll have conversations now where I'm like, dude, you can't full back a boardroom, using that as a metaphor. You can't just plow people over. We're not, your toughness has to take different shapes. So, communication, care, gratitude, these things all layer into a modern conception of toughness that can actually be used in the real world. And if those are absent, then your toughness, eventually you age out of it, and people are just looking around the room at you like, who is this dude? Tone it down, my friend. So anyway, you get the idea.
Yeah. And I love the inspiration behind it, right? And I love how you shared that, it's using sport, which obviously, is a big hook for many people. And, you coming from the educational space as well, like, it reaches people that sometimes can easily fall through the cracks in the traditional education system, right? And I love how it's teaching these greater life lessons. And I know before we were coming on, I think one of the challenges it has, you're talking about like care, grit, resiliency, right? Compassion. I know you posted yesterday about kindness. It's interesting because, like you, I'm a big language, like really being aware of the language we're using. And it's always strikes me as interesting that we term these things, quote unquote, soft skills, or anyone that's there. I just like to relate to them. These are being a great human being, right? They'll help you be a great parent. They'll help you be a great significant other, be great in the boardroom, really great in the game of life.
Yeah.
So I'm curious from your perspective, do you think that is, I don't know, do you think that's contradictory? Do you think that kind of holds us back from people being open or receptive to some of these like kindness, care, love, gratitude, all those things?
Yeah. Yeah. 100. I mean, dude, without question, whoever took concepts like resilience and healthy communication and gratitude and care and kindness and empathy and termed them soft skills was, oh my goodness, dude, it's the greatest disservice to social emotional learning or character development that has ever been done. It's no offense to it, but like they're not soft. They're actually a real challenge. They're hard, and their payoff is through the roof. It's so important and documented like over and over and over again. It's the single worst marketing move in the history of character education, was calling things like that soft skills. No, man, they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. They toughness and kindness, if they're not in the same conversation, you're missing the point, right? There must be balance. Toughness without kindness. Let's just say from a leadership perspective, toughness without kindness just makes you a jerk. Kindness without toughness makes you a pushover. Potentially, and maybe it's not toughness is the balance of kindness, but certainly maybe accountability or something to that extent. But they all belong in the same conversation. So unfortunately, I think what happens is we nab these, the stuff that when a fullback plows through the defensive line to get into the end zone, we name that a certain way, and somehow we believe that that's the thing that we ought to teach for. We over distill it. And I'm thinking just from a football perspective right now, but that metaphor obviously can carry. But if that fullback doesn't have incredible trust in the lineman right before him, the belief and trust that the receiver is going to run a route that takes the safety out of the box or whatever it might be, like it's communication, it's teamwork, it's care. Like all of these things happen even just to bring that really on the surface tough moment to life. But then again, you talk about think about locker room cultures. How many teams have had their legs taken from underneath them by destructive locker room cultures? And the answer is countless. Countless. So if that doesn't happen, in fact, I should have prepared. If I was going to talk about this, I should have pulled the researcher's name. But I'll look it up for you. There's this TED Talk I've seen a couple times. This researcher talks about two groups of chickens. Have you heard this one?
No.
Green zone and red zone chickens. And I don't know that I'll cite the study exactly, but you'll get the idea, I think.
Okay.
Essentially, it talks about like productivity and how there's a group of chickens that really gets along, and there's a group of chickens that's really assertive and high producing. And they take these closer looks. The ones that are really assertive and high producing, there's nothing wrong with being assertive and high producing. I want to be that kind of person if I'm being very open. But the way that they were producing it at a high level was essentially creating a negative environment for the other chickens. So they weren't laying as many eggs. Like literally, they were pecking the other chickens. So they were tamping down the productivity of one sort of chicken so that they would sort of rise to the top. I hope this doesn't get too gruesome, but eventually, there are ways of managing that on a farm, and none of them are pleasant. So this study essentially started to breed for, identify, and separate certain sorts of chickens. So the green chickens, the green zone chickens, the ones that had a disposition, they got along in a group, they were put in one area. The red zone chickens were put in another area. When the cooperative chickens were all together, their egg laying productivity skyrocketed. I can't cite it exactly. Call it 200% or something like that. Skyrocketed. Meanwhile, in this other cage, the red zone chickens who were bred for this one disposition of being assertive, and it was like I don't want to be less than kind here. It was a bloodbath because they're all just attacking each other. like we literally lost chicken lives, so meaning neither, assertiveness or high productivity. The point being in all of this, at least what I sort of gleaned from it, is they all belong. And what we find more often than not, it's the kindness allows the talent to shine. But when the assertive high producers are kind of beating back that other idea, the entire group suffers. And if you take that as a metaphor into certain coaching and team environments, sadly, you see that all the time. You see,
Yeah.
I won't go down that road because it'll make me sound too negative, because there's also incredibly, all enhancing systems and teams that do it so well. But every once in a while you have the negative stuff where coaches just slamming people into each other, and whatever eggs don't crack, they take out on the field on Friday night.
Yeah, no, and it's a great point. And like you said, it's that idea of, I think anyone that's played sport or team sport knows that when a team has a culture of trust, or
Yep.
when they truly have an understanding of each other, that, hey, we might not agree on everything, but we're all working towards that collective vision, that's a strong and powerful team.
Yeah.
And it just reminded me of this work. I read a book. I've actually read it a few times. It's research done by David Hawkins, who Power versus Force. Are you familiar with that book?
I don't know the book specifically. I've heard of David Hawkins though.
Yeah, and he talked about this idea that certain emotions, feelings like anger, resentment, frustration, that you, from a kinesiology standpoint, are actually physically weaker. Where when you come from this, and that's force, where true power comes when you connect to emotions of love and joy and peace, that energetically, even from a kinesiology standpoint, research standpoint, you're stronger. So it really does, the research shows it, but then also this idea of, like, I don't know, when you feel better, you can perform better. So so I love everything you're sharing.
If you wouldn't mind sharing a link to that at some point, I would love to learn more about that. That comes something that I have referenced many times. I spend the bulk of my athletic time these days is spent in the weight room with athletes. So we have a fantastic opportunity to sort of slow things down and educate. It's become a very cool learning environment. But I reference times where, 4th and 1 is a distinguishing factor, as a concept. 4th and 1, games on the line. How is this going to go? Well, what factors go into that? Well, I believe fitness and strength and resilience and mental toughness and these things. But one thing I remind teams of all the time, after having played 16 seasons of football myself, this is not like a feel good, wouldn't it be nice if sort of guess. I played 16 seasons of football. I know how this goes. I've been in 4th and 1 situation. You might have animosity. You might have a real competitive distaste for your opponent. But I'm telling you, love is such a bigger driver than hate could ever be. 4th and 1, you're exhausted, your hands in the dirt, you got to pick up a first down. Like it's not hatred for the other person that gets me coming off the line fast. It just, that was never the thing. If anything, it was like, we break the huddle. I'm getting the chills just thinking about these moments. You break the huddle and I care about him and him. I care about these guys and like, let's us go. Like, let's go, not let's, destroy them. These words get tossed around too much. I can't stay when we talk about, when you use terms like we're going to kill the opponent and things like that. I'm like, man, are you missing the idea here?
Yeah.
Now I like the physicality of football. But again, like I would do more for us with whatever physical capacity I have than I would, for us, not against them. That's always been a really powerful component of my approach as an athlete and the teams that I've been working with. So, and it works.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm getting jacked up thinking about this. The maybe the most interesting thing, at least for the naysayers, is like it works. This is performance enhancement. Also, this is not tough guy. Like we're going to pick up the first down, but we're going to do it for each other. You know, it's so this collaborative, cooperative, care-based approach, even to things like toughness and effort, direct correlation.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you're talking about these. And what comes up for me is, are we practicing these skills? Because like you say, like we sports traditionally places a high value on physically practicing certain skills that
Yeah.
on the field, right? Like you do these, right? You do the individual. The question I always come back to, what are we doing to train the social, the emotional, the mental skills to be able to navigate? Because, I'm a firm believer that, hey, it's easy to be positive and very optimistic when things are going well. But like you said, what if you're down by 14? You're 0-5. Like, have you actually given your athletes and your coaches the opportunity to practice the skills to demonstrate that grit, that resilience? And I don't mean just working harder, but do you actually have the skills to be able to help them get laser focused on the here and the now?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. Are you training it? You also, unfortunately, every so often you hear coaches can be amazing problem identifiers. And the hope is that they would identify accurately and then have skill sets to essentially solve those problems. And if one of the, problem is probably the wrong word, but if our intention is to create a team that has these skills, then like our immediate next task is to decide how we're going to teach and train and practice them. It would not be helpful for a coach to walk off a field on like a Friday night and say, man, I wish we blank had better leadership, got along better, all these things. You could see that, but then you have to go work on that. You can't just hope it shows up on your doorstep. And that's, I worry, man, that I fall into I don't want to be overly critical. So I hope it doesn't come across that way. My only call to action, I think, is exactly that. I think I've heard our mantra, does your behavior match your goal? Well, if your goal is to teach teamwork and you are concerned that your team doesn't have enough of it, then put a little time and thought into the teaching of teamwork. These should be obvious concepts, and unfortunately, sometimes they get glossed over in the stress and pressure of a season. But that's where we come in. Largely, the Good Athlete Project has been serving as a nonprofit education consulting foundation. So what we do is we can come in and help people slow it down. Okay. Tell us what you're saying. What are your concerns? What would you like to be better at? Let's talk through some strategies, and then let's talk through the logistics about how we would actually bring those strategies to life. We're not going to give up 2 hours of practice time, but I bet we could do something pretty cool in 15 minutes if we were deliberate about it. So.
Yeah. And I love that idea, right? Like, in really hearing you is, you're just, it's interesting. I see a program or school bringing you in as they're just choosing to surround themselves with a strong and powerful team, right? People with a different, more specialized knowledge, right? Around the social emotional learning skills. So I'm curious, what have you found from your experience since doing this work? Do you think that we're in a time where people are receptive to this, or like, do you see the times changing? Are people more willing to have these conversations? Because I think everyone could acknowledge the last 2.5 years has definitely shown that wellness, whether it's mental, emotional, social, it's a challenge. It's an issue. Are people more willing to have the conversation, to start investing some time and energy, financial resources into actually helping train these skills?
I have. It's interesting. There's certainly greater receptivity at large to this sort of idea. But with the prevalence of these ideas in mainstream media and things like that, there's also more pushback than ever too. So, but that's not, but those voices are, the dissonance is it's sort of few and far between. Okay. I think the trend most certainly is moving in the right direction. Let's talk about these things. And I hate to say it, but sometimes I don't hate to say it. This is what it is. Sometimes it takes the absence of a thing to recognize just how much you needed it or wanted it or whatever it might have been. So the strain of a global pandemic has in a lot of ways, it was the cause of a lot of stresses and strife and communication concerns, but also highlighted the need for a lot of these capacities. So yeah, no, I definitely think we're trending in the right direction. And people like you hosting conversations like this, and I'm not just trying to pump you. I mean, like hosting conversations, being active, like the narrative is changing. And like we said, language is so important. So step one is really just creating a language around it, because that's another thing that is, sometimes we ask folks to be something that they're not quite ready to be. So if someone does come from the proverbial old school and doesn't have the language and understanding, maybe all of a sudden they recognize the need, but they may not have the skill set and the language to have complicated conversations in a way that's really going to support young people. And that extends just culture and rather character building and social emotional learning. We're also talking about conversation in diversity and equity and all sorts of, you pick the topic. The modern coach needs to be able to have a conversation about it, because that's what's happening now. So that's important as well.
Yeah, I love that idea. And what came up for me is, meeting people where they're at, right? We often hear that in personal growth, self-development. Anyone that's coached or taught knows that you got to meet people where they're at. We can't assume that everyone has had the same lived experience up to that point. That's right. Okay. I actually posted this idea and it prompted me on my run today to think of something a great mentor helped me understand, is this idea. It's far more important to be understanding than it is to be understood. And I was like, and why that resonated with me is it just reminds me it's more important to listen, to actively listen to where people are at. How did they get here? Maybe, that celebrating that diversity of thought, having meaningful conversations, and only then can we then create a path moving forward. So it's interesting how that thought idea got prompted right before we were talking.
I love that you bring that up. Yeah, and I just wrote down what you were saying. Yeah, so we haven't all had the same lived experience. More and more we're starting to recognize that is a huge performance enhancer if you're willing to, like you just said, work to understand. It's not just one person. What is one person? Well, inherently valuable to start off with, but also one set of ideas and experiences. So it's not, I don't think it's the job of one person to impress upon all other people their standards. Leadership development is what I do. So there is a time and place for sharing messages and getting people on your page and all that kind of stuff. But organizationally speaking, and I would even go beyond that, societally, whatever it might be, and from a global perspective, being able to tap into the vast, the expanse of lived experiences and perspectives. If we can pull it all together, what comes from that could be, like I said, the ultimate performance enhancer. Does it take a little time and care and bandwidth? It does. Does it take things like empathy and those lame word but soft skills that we were talking about before? It does. But at the back end, once you've harvested all these incredible and diverse sets of experience, the product is in a totally different and probably more meaningful place than it otherwise would have been. So really important.
I love the word. I love the word you use there. And again, being someone who also values language, like you talk about harvest, right? Like harvest to me is like growth. It's you reap what you sow. And I just remember some of ours, we did some of this social emotional learning skills in our high performance program with our provincial team. And, one of our expected norms was this idea of, be open to diversity of thought, like celebrate it. And it's interesting, but again, it needed to be part of the program. It needed to be put right before we started and sort of framing it, this idea that you could learn a lot from other people's lived experience. If you just actually sit there and listen And so it really
Yeah.
helped me to understand the importance of sort of finding those opportunities to level the language and start to introduce these different empowering words.
Yeah, dude, I completely agree. I completely agree. So yeah, the celebration of diversity of thought, bringing other perspectives into the fold. And it's interesting because there's sort of there's an interesting balance to be struck there though, because there will never be a consensus. And I throw that out there because for what it's worth, in the back of my mind, I'm always anticipating the person who would not agree with us. For whatever reason, I always have that audience in mind. So, we're, at least from my perspective, there is no such thing as consensus. I know a lot of people, especially in organizations, can be frustrated because they, sometimes organizations will slow down massively in pursuit of consensus. That's, at least for me, that's not what I'm suggesting. But to slow down enough to gain a full spectrum of perspectives, that's invaluable. And then eventually a leader or a leadership team has to make the call, take the next step. But yeah, that's just straight up effective. There's no denying it.
It's interesting, like hearing you share, it just reminded me of one of the greatest human needs is to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel appreciated. And that when we give people opportunities to experience that, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel appreciated, only then can we move forward together.
It's the only thing. Okay. And you're right. And that's why you're totally right. So yeah, we want to feel heard. I've shared this a number of times. I think we all share one thing in common. We all share countless things in common, if I'm being totally open. But the one thing for sure we all share is that we want to feel important to some degree. We want to feel like we matter in the world. And that's, that's just a deep centered core truth of humankind is we want to feel like we matter in the world. We want to feel understood. We want to feel heard. And I think it's the job of leaders to recognize that we have to appeal to that in people. It doesn't mean everyone's ideas should be used. You know what I mean? And again, I'm talking to like the actionable part of this thing is like, to be heard is not the same as to be listened to, always. And it's not, it's not like, okay, JT, whatever you say, we're putting it out. You're the man, like always. Yeah. But for me as a leader in this hypothetical situation, to make sure that you have an opportunity to voice your concerns, voice your opinions, and really be heard, essential. And really, it all cycles back to the concept we already talked about, which is trust building. I need to know if we're going to be trusting. I need to know that you at least have some kind of passing interest in me and what I'm about and what I'm interested in, and you should be able to expect the same from me. The ultimate motivation. This is another just absolute unavoidable truth. Motivation is not hyping people up before the kickoff. Motivation is an alignment with people's motives. That's how you motivate people for a long haul. You get people juiced up, you get people excited, but it kind of goes back to that chase the work you're willing to do versus chase your passion. Like excitement is great. It's also fleeting, but motivation, sustained motivation includes alignment with someone's motives. There's no way around that. In fact, I challenge just because I like to be provocative sometimes, JT, is I say like at any given time as a leader, you're either a motivation or an imposition. When you're a motivation, you're aligning with the motives of the people you're in charge of leading.
Yeah.
When you're in imposition, you're imposing your ideals upon them. And, you could make a case that in the midst of things, sometimes you have to toggle between the two. There's a case to be made for that. But I think the more, especially in one's downtime or your time for deep thought, the more you can do that first, align with the motives of people, the more successful you'll be in the grand scheme.
And what you just shared there, I think summarizes, we labeled this conversation in progress, right? It's understanding that this is I almost like flipping this lifelong learner into long life learner, right? Like in
Ooh,
progress, like we're constantly in this period of learning, growth, creation, expansion, right? And I don't know that. So I think it's a perfect segue into my last question for you.
love it.
I'm curious, like, what would you like to see happen with the Good Athlete Project? Like, again, we're having these conversations, right? The Good Athlete Project spurred this conversation. Now, us working together, it's going to hopefully share one nugget of wisdom that just challenges someone to stop and think. What would you like to see happen moving forward?
Well, globally, I'd like to see an evolving conversation of what matters most in athletics. And I want it to be thoughtful and nuanced and actually about life lessons. I want people's behaviors to match their goals. I want people to be honest with themselves about what they're actually, doing in a coaching profession. And, our aim primarily is coaches. We want to support coaches. We want to be on the side of coaches, but that demands honesty. Apologies for that bell, but that demands honesty.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's like, do we have to put our egos aside? That might be something. It might
Mhm.
be, hey, we want this outcome, but we're not sure if we have the skill set for it. Like we just have to, there has to be a humility there. And it's like, that no problem. Okay.
Mhm.
You can learn that skill, but first you have to be honest about the skill you're trying to teach and the fact that you need help teaching it. So, a little bit of humility in the coaching profession and in a heavy focus on professional development. I'll answer your question more directly. We want to maximize the potential of athletics as a learning environment. And I only think that happens with thoughtful professional development constantly. In no other profession would you say things like, hey, I've been doing this for 30 years. Okay. If you're a computer programmer, you've been doing it for 30, if you're doing, if you're doing it the same way as you did 30 years ago,
Mhm.
we need to reevaluate this. Now, that's not to say that there are not strategies that were very successful 30 years ago that we can pass forward and continue on. There absolutely are. But as the world evolves, we have to evolve alongside it.
Mhm.
And I think so much of sport just, I know that's a big open statement, but I just think
Yeah.
it has some of the most meaningful, emotional, profound moments in my life have happened on or around a field or a weight room.
Yeah.
And that's a fact. So to not value it as such, I feel like is just a missed opportunity. So it really is. We want to keep an evolving we want to be at the forefront of an evolving conversation of sports as education.
Love it. I couldn't agree more. So I'm curious, brother, is there anything that we could do to support where you're growing? Is there anything that we can do to be of service to help you, manifest the vision?
You're amazing. Well, just the fact that someone like you is asking a question as generous as that is a good indicator, because I think we all have to be on each other's side. I think there's if we ever wanted to talk specifics, dude, I'd be on the next plane up there to help push forward what you got going on and contribute in any way. But we can certainly talk specifics on that. I think sharing each other's ideas is meaningful. Another truth of the profession is there's more than enough to go around. There's we learn this we're not trying to pretend that we invented character development through sport. We think we do a pretty good job at it, but so do countless others. So if we can also remember that in the greater world of coach educators, I think we'd be in a really good place. So I'll turn that back and say, if we can ever do anything for you, I hope you'll let us know, because I'm grateful for your messaging and all that you're doing, man. You're every day. You're an every down back, as they say.
I do my best. I do my best. I do my
Yeah.
best. Okay. Well, thank you, brother. And like I said, I'm more than happy to share all the social links and just get people again to share some of these ideas. I think this conversation is a great start. I'm glad we were able to move our offline conversations,
Yeah.
and bring it to the mainstream and really, just help share a greater message.
Definitely.
before I let you go, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you, Jim. I want to acknowledge you for the man you are, the great teacher, the great coach, the great mentor, but more importantly, the amazing human being you are, Jim. Like you, I've been blessed to really just be blessed to have this work, to be shared about how impactful it can not only help you succeed as an athlete, but in the game of life. So I just want to thank you for just choosing to be the man you are and just helping to truly help and serve the hearts of others. So thank you, brother.
Dude, you're welcome. I've actually been coached not to just to accept compliments. So I appreciate you very much. I feel the same way about you. You use the word blessing. It's a blessing to be able to do the work that myself and my team are doing. So grateful for you as well, man. No doubt.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. So folks, Jim drops so many valuable nuggets of wisdom that will not only help you succeed in sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. So my reminder to you is that knowledge is potential power. It's the consistent and focused application of great knowledge that actually creates great results. So my challenge to you is to take one of these valuable nuggets of wisdom and go apply it to your life today. And as I remind you every week in the huddle, you are deserving of greatness. You are worthy of greatness. You are greatness. And my only ask from these conversations is, if it resonated with you, if it touched your heart, to share it with a loved one, a teammate, a friend, someone who you think needs to hear this message. Because the more people we hear that we have understanding and applying these simple ideas, the greater this world can be. Yeah. As always, I look forward to having these conversations again, and we'll see you next time in the huddle. Have a blessed day, everyone.
Love it, man. That's awesome.